Hi, let's talk some more about these two-player games where each player has two moves and nature also has two moves. What's really going on is that there's two types of player one. Player one is a lefty or a righty. You can imagine in a more realistic game, maybe nature makes you smart or stupid, or honest or dishonest. Then you know what you're like, you know if you're smart or stupid or honest or dishonest, and you make a move. Then someone else observes that move and they have to figure out what to do, and part of figuring out what they need to do is trying to guess your type, to guess if you're honest or smart. Actually, the reason I started doing these YouTube lectures was because of these games. I've been teaching them in my class. I wasn't really satisfied with the quality of my teaching, so I thought perhaps if I did a whole bunch of videos on them, maybe my students, I'd do a better job of communicating these games to my students. But now let's consider this game. So why don't you pause the video and try to figure out what you think will happen. Okay, let me give you a hint. This game has two equilibria. So if you only found one equilibria, why don't you pause the video again, try to find the other. Okay. So I'm going crazy here with the high-tech stuff, and I'm using blue and green. So blue is stuff that has to happen, and green is stuff that could happen because there'll be two equilibria, right? Some, the blue will be in both equilibria, but some of the green will just be in one, and for another sheet, green will be in the other. So let's look at the stuff that must happen. So this and this must happen, right? Because if down is picked, player two will see, well, look, if I knew if I was on the left, 5 is greater than 0, I'd want L, and if I knew I was on the right, 42 is greater than 13. So player two, down is picked, is definitely going with L. Something else that we know must be picked is right here. Because if left is picked, nature picks left, player one is a lefty, player one has a dominant strategy of up. Because you see, if you go up, at worst you get 22. If you go down, at best you get 20. So if you're player one, you're a lefty, you're going up, and everyone knows this. Okay, but let's now see why player two doesn't have a dominant strategy if he was here. If player two were here, well, if he knew he was on the left, he'd want X because 0 is greater than negative 88. Whereas if he knew he was on the right, he'd want Y because obviously this giant number is bigger than 12. Player one doesn't have a dominant strategy if he's a righty because this number and this number are not both greater than these two or both less than. Or you can imagine going up could give you 1 while going down could give you 16, so it's possible down could be better. But also going up could give you 15 where going down could give you 2, so it's possible going up could be better. So this means that player one can't figure out what he's going to do until he first figures out what player two is going to do. So right now, let's consider the equilibrium where player one plays up. All right, let's just see, will there be an equilibrium? So this could happen. Well, now, if player one is going to play up, what would player two do if player two gets to move? So in the only time player two would not regret his choice if up is played and is an equilibrium in which both players play up is if he picks Y, just because I made this so absurdly large, we don't even have to do the math, right? If you're in an equilibrium and you know that both people picked up, you would regret not playing Y because of the 50% chance of having gotten this. Okay, and this is an equilibrium. So let's now find the other equilibrium. It'll be equilibrium where player one goes down if he's a righty. Okay, so in an equilibrium in which player one goes down if he is a righty, well, player two in this equilibrium would only regret not playing X because in this equilibrium, he knows if up is played, he's on the left, and so he would want to play X in response. So this is a separating equilibrium because the player for whom there's uncertainty about separates. You see, when player two gets to move in this equilibrium, he knows who he's dealing with because nature doesn't reveal whether player one is a lefty or a righty, but the player one takes actions that cause him, that, he voluntarily basically discloses the information. He does things that causes this to be revealed. My cat is about to walk through the video, excuse me. Okay, so let's look at this equilibrium. Now, player one doesn't regret not going up in this equilibrium, because if he were to go up in this equilibrium, he would end up with only 1 because X is played. Let's review again what I mean by no regrets equilibrium in this kind of game. You can imagine that, the 3 types of players are writing down what they do. So player one, if he's a lefty, is writing down. Player one, if he's a righty, he would be writing down hypothetically what he would be doing. And then player two would be writing down what he would do if he ended up here or here. And no one regrets what they've done, given what the other 2 people have done, also given that you can't affect what the other 2 people have done. So player 2 would say, well, if I can't affect player 1 is a lefty going up and player 1 is a righty going down, then I want to do this. I would want to play X at the top and L at the bottom. I would regret, playing Y at the top. In the previous equilibrium, right, if there's an equilibrium in which player 2 says, well, lefty is always going up and righty is always going up, in that case, I would regret not always playing Y. Now, it's true, of course, it might be that he's actually playing against a lefty, but that's sort of random chance, and we don't consider that sort of a regret. You don't regret that you got unlucky. You regret that your strategy wasn't an optimal response to everyone else's strategy. So again, you don't regret it. Like if you're playing blackjack and you don't take a hit on a 20, but if you had taken a hit, you would have gotten an ace, and that that's the only reason you would have won. You don't, in a sense, regret because you played the optimal move. So regret is not whether you got lucky or not. Regret is, was your response optimal? Was your response optimal given the other people's moves that in this kind of game you can't control? And this is an equilibrium in which everyone's response is optimal given everyone else's move. But there's also an equilibrium where we have up, Y, and Y that everyone also is behaving optimally. So there can be multiple equilibria in these kind of games. All right, let's go to another game. Why don't you pause the video and look for equilibria? Okay, surprise, oh, it's a trick question. There are not any equilibria in this game, at least unless we talk about mixed strategies, which I do not want to do. I don't do mixed strategies with these kind of games in my game theory course anymore, and I'm not going to in these lectures. So now I'll use red and blue. Blue is stuff that must happen. Red is just, we'll consider the possibility. You can't get an equilibria, so this is just, we're considering if this happens, will it be an equilibria, but it won't be. Okay, so for the must-happen stuff, again, player 2, if down is played, he really wants to do L. Because he wants to do L, he's better off doing L if he's on the left, because this is bigger than this. He's better off doing L on the right, because this is bigger than this. And player 1, if he's a lefty, has a dominant strategy of going up, because both of these numbers are greater than both of these numbers. As before, player 2 doesn't have a dominant strategy if up is played, because if he was here, he'd want to go X, while if he was here, he'd want to go Y. And player 1, if he's a righty, doesn't have a dominant strategy because, again, both of these numbers are not either both bigger or both smaller than both of these numbers. Okay, so let's now consider whether there can be an equilibrium. So first I want to consider the possibility of an equilibrium in which player 1 plays down if he's a righty. Well, if player 1 is going to play down if he is a righty, then player 2 would only not regret playing X, right? Because in this equilibrium, player 2 will know if up is played, hey, I'm right here, and of course I would prefer to get 0 than negative 88. But you see, this is not an equilibrium. This isn't an equilibrium because player 1, if he's a righty, would regret going down, because in this equilibrium, he's going down and getting 2, whereas if he went up, he would get 15. So if you look at the previous example that we did, that didn't happen. So this is not an equilibrium because player 1, who is a righty, regrets what he's doing. He regrets going down. This is not an optimal response to player 2's strategy. So there's not an equilibrium in which down is played. So let's consider, is there an equilibrium in which up is played? Okay, in an equilibrium in which up is played, what will player 2 do? Well, because again, I made this so absurdly large, if player 1 is a righty, goes up, and player 2 says, well, 50% chance here, 50% chance here, he is definitely going with Y. So given that player 1, who's a righty, plays up, player 2's optimal response is to play Y, and he would regret not playing Y. But again, now player 1, who is a righty, he's going to regret his actions are going up, because in this equilibrium, going up gives him only 1, whereas going down would have led to 2. So this is not an equilibrium, and this game, so since this has to happen, and there isn't an equilibrium in which player 1 goes up, and there isn't an equilibrium in which player 1 goes down, there isn't an equilibrium unless we were to allow a randomization where player 1 said, well, I'll go up, X% of the time and down Y% of the time. There'll be one of those, but not worrying about that for this series of lectures. Thank you very much.